listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here for The Briefing. Women's basketball would have been lucky to rate a mention in America, let alone Australia, a little while ago. Think the Matildas before the World Cup. They had their fans, but it was hard to really crack into the mainstream. And that was until a young woman named Caitlin Clark came along. The 22-year-old is one of the most promising female basketball players in the US, making the transition from college ball to being signed as the #1 draft pick for the Indiana Fever this year. She's generating a lot of buzz, and it's translating into more fans in the stands. But, and it's a big but, a lot of that hype has been born out of the controversy surrounding her race, spurred on by right-wing commentators in the US. Why? Because she's a white player in a sport that's been dominated for a long time by black players. The Briefing's Sasha Barbagat spoke with Triple M Sydney's Cat Lynch, a former US college basketball player herself, to find out more about Caitlin, the controversy surrounding her, and whether it's ultimately a good or a bad thing for the women's game in America.
Kat, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Why is everyone talking about Caitlin Clark right now?
Okay, I love it. She's probably the most popular basketball player for the women in the world right now. And she was a huge college star. So over the last 2 years, she went to Iowa University and made the national championships both times, but didn't win. She just blew up because everyone loved her. She shoots threes like Steph Curry. So,
okay, can you put that into layman's non-basketball term? Is that like the highest scoring points you can get?
Yeah, three-pointer, so it's a furthest shot away. It's really impressive when people drain a shot from almost – she can do it from the label, which is basically almost half court.
Wow.
So she just blew up after the college game and then got drafted first as a rookie into the WNBA. And this is her first season. I think they're about 14 or 15 games into the season. People are flocking to see her play. She is – I've never seen – it warms my heart because I've never seen anyone take an interest in women's basketball like they have since the name Caitlin Clark came into an existence.
Yeah, right. So that's really interesting because that was going to be my next question, is that basketball just isn't – it has a following in Australia, but it's not that big in terms of like a commercial point of view or like spectator point of view. We're not – well, I guess we do pack out stadiums sometimes, but, you know, it's very different here compared to what it's like in the US. Can you set the scene for us and explain what, like, pre-Caitlin Clark, what was the situation for women's basketball in the US compared to men's basketball?
Oh, there was not even a comparison. There might have been some college teams that got a lot of following. WNBA, you'd be lucky to have you'd have 7,000 in the stands if it was a huge game. But they would have been lucky to have a few thousand people in the stands. Since she's come on board, to put this into perspective, her team, Indiana Fever, played the Washington Mystics a few weeks ago. Washington Mystics averaged 3,000 people in the stands.
Okay.
They packed out the NBA stadium. Almost 20,000 people were there to see the game and to see her specifically. So she's travelling like a circus with all these fans to different locations, and she can be in LA and 15,000 people will be there to see her rather than the home team.
Yeah, right.
So
it's really interesting because we were talking a bit about this off air before we hit record, and I can't think of a team sport in Australia where there's been one player who has driven so much interest. So I'm guessing that's pretty similar. It's a similar landscape in the US where it's usually you get interest in a team, there's superstar players, but people flocking to a sport that they haven't usually watched because of one player seems pretty incredible.
It is, and I think unfortunately for her, with that comes a lot of hate from not only her own teammates, which I think really startled everyone at first. You could tell there was a bit of friction watching them play because this one player's coming in, and a lot of these girls have been grinding for 10 years and have been top of the field, and you can see there's jealousy there that this player has, right from the get-go, has the biggest shoe deal ever with Nike in the women's sport. And you've got arguably probably the greatest player at the moment that didn't have a shoe deal with Nike. And so because of that, the follow-on is Nike ended up saying, bad, Asia will also have a shoe deal on the way. But Yeah, it's been very interesting watching people flock to the sport, and she's been actually quite reserved in, she's not arrogant. Like, I haven't ever heard her front the press and say anything negative about anyone else. She's sort of taken it in stride and kind of kept her mouth shut in a lot of ways. But players from both her team and, you know, around the league, you can tell there's a bit of friction because they're like, well, we've been grinding for so long and suddenly everyone is flocking to see this one player.
Yeah. And look, there's been a recent kind of controversy surrounding Caitlin Clark, and that's around the Olympic selection. Tell us what happened there.
So she didn't get selected in the Olympic squad, and immediately, because she's got such incredible support, it's like anything, they'll fire up and create a bit of a rhetoric around it as if, you know, she's been horribly hard done by and hasn't made the team. And to be honest, when I first saw it too, I went, oh, how dare they not select Caitlin Clark? And then I actually looked at the team list and went, no, you know what? It's actually probably pretty fair.
Yeah.
When you look at, because it's positional, you can't just have a whole team full of guards, which she is. And I looked at down the list and I was like, okay, people competing for her spot. Sabrina Ionescu, who is probably one of the greatest players at the moment. She's a better all-round player for the Olympics team. Diana Taurasi, who is probably, might be the GOAT in a lot of people's eyes. Also her spot. Deserves to be there. A couple of guards, you know, as well that have been selected that are actually statistically averaging more points and have fewer turnovers than her in the WNBA at the moment. So when you kind of take a step away from all the excitement around her, you kind of go, oh, no, that's probably pretty fair. She will, in 4 years' time, she'll probably be one of the stars of the team. But right now...
Well, she's 22 and she's a rookie, right?
Exactly.
She's got to earn her dues.
Exactly.
And she's not there yet. But I think the concerning thing as well has been, unfortunately, discussions around racism. Now, could you step us through what race has to do with any of this?
Okay. And again, this is generated not by her. It's generated by her support group that is far and wide and some of them quite right-wing. And so it's not actually coming from anything she's said or done. And so because obviously it's very competitive and people are competing for a very limited amount of spots on the court, people have been quite rough with her. They're kind of targeting her. They're jostling her. And the league is largely made up of African-American women. And so she's getting jostled to the ground a lot. And then so these supporters are coming out in fury saying, oh, you're targeting her, essentially implying that other players might be thugs. And a racial element is coming into it, which is she's very clearly staying out of it. She doesn't say anything negative about any other players. And so then obviously that chat around it is yucky, and it comes to the head that then, you know, these African-American players feel targeted by her supporters who are saying hateful things to them. And like one incident, one of the girls came off the team bus and got harassed by a fan of Caitlin Clark's and saying some unsavoury things. So there's that yucky element to this attention that she's been getting, and unfortunately the race card is coming into it. And she's a white player that's very marketable and has this huge shoe deal. So it would be quite easy, I would think, for other players to go, well, hang on a sec, you know, we're good players too. Why are we not getting this same attention and these same deals and sponsorships? Is it because we're African-American players and aren't in that what's considered in America, middle America, the marketable player?
Yeah. And inevitably in the US, when the race card gets pulled out, right-wing commentators are jumping on it. I mean, what is the public buying into this? You know, you're talking about Caitlin Clark's supporters and, you know, the players who might or might not feel hard done by. Is the public buying into this narrative of, like, it's racist?
I think some are to an extent, and the problem is you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't in her respect, because then you've got, you know, a lot of these players who are getting all this commentary, and racism is coming into it with, you know, people getting behind the fury of the support of Caitlin Clark. And then if you're her, you're sort of like, do I come out and say something? And she did make a comment in the end. She did say, look, I don't want my name associated with any racial tension or narrative. That's not what I want in the game. And so you've got players going, okay, you've got this huge platform. You should probably speak out and defend us. But then when you do, suddenly you've got people going, just shut up and dribble that are support. You know, it's just such a tough position for her to be in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think people are kind of getting caught up in the fury of it. And unfortunately, that's where it gets icky with all that attention. But with the attention, it comes with that.
Yes.
So it's how you navigate around that.
And I do want to get to that in a second in terms of the interest she's generated in the game. But just quickly, I want to touch on the social media issue. Caitlin Clark has said, or expressed this desire to kind of stay away from social media. Do you think it's really hard for sports people in the modern age to have to balance that, where it's like, you know, I want to have a platform and I want to communicate with my supporters and fans and people who come to watch me play, but then they also have to deal with the additional scrutiny that comes with that?
Absolutely. And I think this is also probably touches a nerve also for female athletes because, you know, they don't get paid very much. And even women's basketball players, they come in on a $70,000 contract and Australian players, they're coming in sometimes 10, 15. So you need a whole other job. So you kind of want your social media to gain some interest. So then you get sponsorships and you can afford to compete and you can afford to live and potentially set yourself up. So I can see that. But then the negative, you know, sport is such a mental game when if you're confident and you're feeling good about yourself, you play better. So then suddenly you go to your social media account and you've got some, you know, idiot on there giving you and it's probably some troll that has never done anything in their life telling you that, you know, you can't hit shots or you're not good or you shouldn't be on the team. It does.
Fucks you out.
Yeah, it filters in a bit. So I can see the conflict of, you know, I think she's probably, what she probably does is has someone that probably posts for her and
monitors the account.
She probably doesn't read comments. I wouldn't either. If
No
I was
way.
any of them, I wouldn't read comments.
Well, especially given the scrutiny that she or the conversation that's happening without her consent around race and the sport. Look, before we let you go, Kat, how much do you think all of this chatter is because she's a woman? Like, would we see the same thing happen to a bloke?
You do in circumstances. So like big players like LeBron, if he makes any statement, whether it's slightly political or if he's supporting something, you do. In a weird way, I think this is wonderful for the game because people are talking about it. And I played college basketball. We were lucky to get 50 people to our game. No one was talking about us, you know, and I'm seeing I think eventually the other players that right now are a bit disgruntled by the furor all around Caitlin Clark. In a couple of years, I think they might grow to appreciate it when sponsorships also come their way because suddenly eyes are on the sport.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the WNBA has never made money and probably won't for another couple of years. But this is the start, is getting bums on seats and people talking about it. So I think the more people are talking about it, even though there is that horrible negative side to it that we're seeing, I think in the end, the way for the sport to grow is for people to show up.
Well, they do say no publicity is bad publicity. So
yeah, sometimes it is, but
I suppose in this case, though, as you said, there are hopes that it'll bring more eyes and more bums on seats to women's games. Kat, what an interesting chat. Like I said, basketball isn't big in Australia, but you've painted a very fascinating picture. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. It was a pleasure.
Cat Lynch there, speaking with The Briefing's Sasha Barbagat. That's it for this episode of The Briefing, but before you go, a quick reminder, we put out full eps of our weekend briefing chats on YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom to see them. Speaking of the weekend briefing, who do you have on tomorrow, Antoinette?
My guest is Victoria Latu, and there is so much more to her than meets the eye or even the ear when you hear her accent. She has a fascinating journey from where she was born, her career, and how she came to be a celebrity stylist. You won't want to miss it. Fascinating chat. Enjoy.
You can also catch up with our other video content on TikTok at Listener Newsroom and on Instagram, which is at The Briefing Podcast. And if you like this app, why not share it with someone you think might enjoy it too? I'm Ben Sion Siebert. Catch you next time.